We hear a lot about psychedelic-assisted therapy, but 3 out of 4 people who choose to consume psychedelics do so at home or in nature with friends or loved ones. I'm April, founder of Set, an integration platform to help you get the most out of your psychedelic experiences. The podcast episode you're about to listen to may reference one of my previous shows, The High Guide or How to Do the Pot, because I've been a trusted source in cannabis and psychedelics since 2015. I invite you to visit getsetset.com and sign up for our newsletter to receive your free guide on set and setting to make the most of your next psychedelic journey. This podcast discusses cannabis and is intended for audiences 21 and over. This episode is going to be a little shorter, yet chock full of ways to approach overcoming our collective trauma related to the pandemic. Whether, if you can remember back, March 2020, you had the same routine for a decade plus and it was completely taken off course, or if you're more like me and choose to live every day as if it's a fresh adventure and found yourself living out a very grounded and consistent day-to-day, our lives changed dramatically overnight, as did the lives of the people we love, friends and family. And how each of us chose to weather this nearly 2-year period is as different as we are. What I learned during this time is that my friends who've experienced past trauma were experiencing symptoms related to PTSD because the fear of uncertainty we faced from COVID-19 was a trigger for any horrifying event that felt unpredictable and uncontrollable. I watched friends become lost in a loop of OCD planning, adopt a victim mindset, and start questioning everyone else's life choices in order to ignore their own, naturally. Shit got cray for us all, and now we're talking about it. So let's also do something about it. If it takes the promise of consuming psychedelics to force you to face the irreversible ways the pandemic has evolved our inner and outer worlds, then do yourself a favor and give yourself permission to get high, to get comfortable with discomfort, because we're going to be here a while, especially now that we know we were here all along, but with smoke and mirrors, of course. We created entrenched thinking and behavior to live comfortably amidst the chaos of our modern world. You can't change the story if your body is still holding its trauma. To create a new story, you literally need to embody a new reality. Or so I heard while listening to podcast host Ezra Klein interview the author of The Body Keeps the Score, and I'm quoting author Bessel A. van der Kolk. He says, trauma victims cannot recover until they become familiar and befriend the sensations of their bodies. Being frightened means that you live in a body that is always on guard. Angry people live in angry bodies. So this got me thinking that if we want to move past this place where we are and create life in our new reality, we got to face these fucked years. This information in this episode is for you to take in and use to create an intention for yourself the next time you find yourself under the influence of plant medicine and want to poke the tiger a bit. Revisit this episode following your trip to compare insights shared here with your psychedelic-assisted insights to start to make sense of how you feel in your mind and body today.
I feel like my psychedelic experiences before the pandemic were almost like a training for handling something like a pandemic with grace, if that makes any sense.
That makes total sense. What other boot camp can match keeping your head game strong while uncontrollable external stressors are trying to fuck your shit up? Tripping, period. Throughout these integration episodes, you're going to hear time and again great pride in conquering the invisible emotional and psychic forces brought on by particularly challenging psychedelic experiences. Like Natasha Lannerd, who facilitated our last integration episode, faced when she consumed psilocybin. She's in conversation here with Emily McCarter on her podcast, High Minded with McCarter.
My mom died when I was a child of a brain tumor when I was 6 years old. And there was just a lot of other stuff that happened. When I was 18, I had a really big experience. And I never really cried from the time I like realized after the fact. I had a huge cathartic moment. And I realized I hadn't really cried for the majority of my life from the time I was 6 years old until I was 18.
Wow.
And then I really realized in that experience that that the psilocybin and the mushrooms were an ally in accessing trauma that I think that pretty much everyone has something.
Yes.
Right? And to get at that in a way and to move that more than even getting at it, right? It's not good enough to get at it.
In the following tape from Natasha's integration with Colton Winger's psychedelic experience for journey number 3, she offers a way for us to move past just getting at it passively, like we would have as a scared child, and rather go after it like a supported adult who can now intellectualize their experience. When you find yourself feeling separate, or you find yourself, your cup being empty or whatever it is, just sit and just ask yourself, how old is this person who's talking? Because we have all of this experience in our lives, especially as like just two humans coming from a very similar situation that is rife with trauma. That core wound of separation, for me, comes from a very young place.
Yeah.
A very young place. And when I really hold into it, it's around 5 or 6. And when I realized that version of myself, that young version of myself is the one doing the talking, I, as an adult, as a 36-year-old adult, and sometimes, you know, my teacher has taught us to do it on one hand, it's the voice that's talking that young side. And then I'm able to say, like, what do you need? What do you need that me as an adult can give to you? Because there's no changing it. But what I can do is show this version of myself as an adult what self-love is. This is the difference between self-care and self-love. And one of the things that makes this very definitive is the control piece, the way to balance that out, or an exercise in balancing out and kind of teasing through is what safety means to you. Early data suggests that women are more likely to turn to psychedelic-assisted therapy to address trauma. Given that women are twice as likely to develop PTSD than men, because women are more likely to experience sexual assault, which in turn is more likely to cause PTSD than many other events. So let's start with our collective trauma, knowing that we live among women who've survived far worse for far longer.
I recalled a lot of things from my birth with my daughter. I always felt like I'm dying, because in that moment I was dying and I never got rid of that emotion. So whenever things stressed me, I went back to that stressful emotion.
Goodness. Yes.
I'm dying. And it just always would take over me. I would tell people it was like a wave, and I would be sitting there gently playing in the water. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know, I can't get out from under this tide.
You just heard from Sandra Gwines, aka the Cush Nurse, speaking to Kia Baker, the host of the Female Veterans Podcast. Sandra is a nurse with over 15 years of experience. Her story of finding cannabis to help the PTSD she experienced after a traumatic birth inspired her to help others find the right cannabis medicine. Kia and Sandra have graciously shared audio from a recent episode, and you can hear more of their story on the Female Veterans Podcast. Women are twice as likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. The medications prescribed are intended for short-term use, but women find themselves suffering side effects for decades rather than manage life without meds. Sandra continues talking about how cannabis for sleep helps her process the PTSD in her dreams.
One of the things about cannabis is with PTSD, it's really helpful because it decreases your REM sleep cycle. So it decreases the ability for you to have nightmares. So with a lot of PTSD sufferers, that's one of the biggest triggers is the nightmares and night terrors. Not the first time, but a few times after that, you'll start to have some more psych effects where you can maybe recall memories and things like that, which is really good for PTSD sometimes because you're recalling these memories, but the memories can be recalled in a way where your body is not in that fight or flight, reaction.
Her logic also applies to recalling memories while under the influence of psychedelics. Assigning new bodily sensations to the memory can neutralize our physical reactions. It's up to us to manage our irrational outward emotional reactions. Remember one of the behaviors I mentioned witnessing at the top of the show? Watching my friends with past trauma become super critical of others. And remember what I also added, that usually it's to distract themselves from facing their own discomfort. Doing so only prolongs our feelings of isolation. No matter how good it may feel to play the hater, studies show that dropping judgment can significantly reduce loneliness.
Everyone has trauma.
Yeah.
And you can't compare trauma either.
No. And frankly,
And
when
people, I see that still. People are always, well, I had a worse growing up situation than them. I know it, so they can't,
Yeah.
It's just like, damn, we need to just all come together and help each other
Well,
with plant medicine.
I don't know about you, but I feel like after my plant medicine experiences, I love people more.
Yes.
I feel way more tolerant
I have
to
more
people I don't
empathy.
that I don't agree with, and I am more kind to myself. And what comes out of these experiences is so rich, frankly. The integration of those experiences, especially if they're really deep and impactful, take time.
A New York Times article written by Dr. Jennifer Tates, an assistant clinical professor in psychiatry at UCLA, titled How to Reduce Your Risk of PTSD in a Post-COVID-19 World. I'll link to it in the show notes. Dr. Tate says, and I quote, "I can't emphasize enough that it's normal to feel anxious now." Yay, we're all finally normal. To process thoughts about the pandemic that replay in your mind, she offers some techniques for when your thoughts aren't useful. Engage in mentally absorbing activities like working on a crossword puzzle or just working, or grounding yourself by noticing 3 sights, 3 sounds, and 3 sensations in your environment again and again. When ruminating starts, catch it and exchange it for gratitude. This advice also holds true when you're tripping. If you're prone to an OCD loop when not under the influence of psychedelics, then you may be in a loop far longer than you realize before it dawns on you. Or if you, like me, were once prone to looping, but thanks to insert successful cocktail of tools to manage, then if you get stuck in a thought while tripping, start to listen and look more intently. Another thing I do to come back into my body when I'm too in my head is alternating tapping my thumb to my pointer and middle finger. I can do it on one hand, sometimes I do it on 2 hands. And according to Tim Held, who composed Journeys number 2, and number 4, there is certainly useful advice to be found on this show.
Because of this podcast that you're currently listening to, I decided that I would dabble again with edibles, with THC, because I just have kind of a bad relationship with THC. It gives me anxiety and just doesn't make me feel great. And I realized that was just a dosage issue, really. So I just decided to take a quarter of what everybody else takes, and I started realizing that, I really enjoy this, and it really relaxes me, but it's as long as I don't cross that certain threshold. So yeah, thank you, April, for that.
No problem, Tim. I'm always here to help you and all you listeners find yourself high.